Welcome back. Ask and ye shall receive. To my complete lack of surprise, Oxygen Not Included seems to have been the best received of the 3 games I trialed, so for now it is going to be the one I continue with. For those of you who were more interested in the other 2, worry not, they haven't gone away, but I only have so much time in the day to record, especially since I'm still working on nothing and have a secret side project that I'm putting in hours for to try and liven up my next Minecraft series, so they will be on the back burner for a bit. Oxygen Not Included last left off with me digging a very deep hole in search of magical treasures. Or possibly just a way of producing renewable water and power. The closest thing I found was a bunch of really hot oil, though, and it is too hot for me to safely explore further, so I'm not really looking to go down that front. With downwards expansion made mildly inconvenient due to the presence of a biome-wide deep fat fryer, I direct my attention over to the right. Popped eardrums are starting to become a problem again, so I need to clear out some space, and there appears to be something buried next to a flower that is outputting a really unnecessary amount of zombie spores. I'm assuming those don't do anything good if you inhale them, so that's gonna be fun to deal with in a bit. The expansion project somewhat backfires on the whole lowering stress front by releasing an enormous amount of polluted overpressurized oxygen when I start working on it, but that is, I'm sure, just a temporary setback. Dupes don't need their ears anyway. What do you think this is? RimWorld? In an effort to further combat stress, which is almost entirely because of Kasyu, because of her extensive work assignments, I pick up my next colonist named Drake. Drake's job is going to be to mush down all of our raw meal lice into something called lice loaf. This somehow improves its caloric content substantially and has the side benefit of upgrading the quality of meal from grisly to merely terrible, which should translate to improved morale and less stress. After doing a bit of reading from the in-game database, I also think I have a solution to the zombie spore problem. The spores are all coming from the spore kid, which is that flower thing that looks like it's coughing. So if I can get rid of that, the spore level should stop accumulating. Unlike slime lung and food poisoning, zombie spores can persist in oxygen, though, so if I crack the natural cave containing the spores open willy-nilly, they're going to escape and turn my dupes into brain-hungry little monstrosities, or something. I don't really know, and I don't really want to find out. The compendium isn't very clear on what will happen other than a temporary loss of motor function, but let's be real here. Any particularly virulent form of bacteria called zombie spores probably does one of 2 things. Conveniently for me, one of the few things that can kill zombie spores, which is chlorine gas, exists in a pocket nearby, and I plan on popping that open to drown the spores. I've made a little basin in the floor that should hopefully trap a 2-tile high gap of pure chlorine, and the plan is to filter the spores through that, killing them off in the process. The idea does work, eventually, but I run into problems supplying enough chlorine to do what I need it to do, and ended up having to excavate and drain most of the surrounding biome to fill even a small pit with pure chlorine, which takes a bit. Either way, now that the pit's full, there is naught to do but pop a hole in the thing and see what happens. Don't turn into a zombie, please, Gray. We still need you to dig out the rest of the asteroid. After giving things a bit to stabilize, I can confirm that the chlorine gas definitely did its job. There seems to be a tendency for germs to not want to spread between different gas types that caused some issues, and a pocket of CO2 is retaining them well enough to make complete eradication take a bit, but their extinction should be inevitable. The fossil that I found looks like another set piece thing, so I don't know how useful it will be, but my work with spores seems to have found the edge of the map, so all in all, still kind of a productive use of my time. Those oxygen levels aren't going to depressurize on their own, and if we can't go to the east, that just means we have to go to the west. Onwards, my dupes. Adventure and crippling novel infections await. Westward expansion yields valuable resources almost immediately in the form of a cool steam geyser, and also dysentery. The database says that these geysers are sources of infinite materials, albeit in relatively small amounts, and since this particular geyser outputs steam, and steam can be condensed back down into water, which I need an infinite source of, this seems like excellent news to me. Provided I can figure out a way of dumping the excess heat somewhere. This is going to be a theme for this run. Heat management is kind of a long-term chronic endgame problem for Oxygen Not Included, and I do not have the capacity to deal with it right now. Almost immediately after finding the cool steam geyser, I find a geyser peeing out salt water at a balmy 95 degrees centigrade. This is also useful, but the temperature could leave some room for improvement. Currently, the only way I think I have of deleting large amounts of heat is superheating compressed gases and venting them into space, but I'm not sure that's going to be enough for this geyser, to be honest. This is a lot of heat. This is also the end of the world there on the far left, so no more exploration west for me. Well, that leaves one direction, and that direction is straight up. Get digging, dupes. Space waits for no pawn. The trip to space, it turns out, is not very interesting. Other than sticking a really long shaft in the ceiling and getting a bunch more slime lung infections, nothing happens. I mean, it was worth a shot, I guess, but sure. In light of the general lack of interesting things to dig towards, it's time to start really getting into the meat of the game, which is all of the weird production and automation jankery you can do. My first project is a very ambitious bit of engineering compared to the stuff I've done already. I want a Dreco ranch. Glossy Drecos, to be precise. And there is a lot that goes into this. For starters, Drecos are a passive critter that are kind of like sheep if sheep crawled around on the ceiling and had two sets of eyes. They come in two variants, regular and glossy, and which variant is expressed largely depends on the environment they're being cultivated in. Regular Drecos give reed fiber when sheared, which is already a pretty decent deal since regular thimblereed plants, which is the only other source of the stuff, drink 160 kilograms of polluted water per cycle, and that's a lot. Glossy Drecos, on the other hand, can be sheared for plastic, which I need a whole lot of for a whole lot of things. Okay, so great, they're sheep. Spider sheep, but still sheep. How hard can it be to farm them? Very, because glossy Drecos need a hydrogen atmosphere to grow their scales. Dupes don't like hydrogen because it hurts their eyeballs. And the other problem with hydrogen is that Drecos need to eat living mealwood plants to grow into the glossy variant. And the mealwood plants won't grow in a hydrogen atmosphere, so the ranches need to be half hydrogen and half oxygen, polluted oxygen, or carbon dioxide. And that ratio needs to remain mostly stable, or you will starve the Drecos or not get glossy variants. Once the basic layout of the room is completed, I have to figure out how I'm going to maintain the atmospheric stasis. Preserving hydrogen will be easy because nothing consumes it, but dupes will slowly breathe away any oxygen sources that are left in the room, so I'm going to want to fill it with carbon dioxide instead, which means they will probably want some oxygen masks as well to do that small inconvenient task known as respiration. I don't know where the carbon dioxide they expel will end up, but a little bit of extra CO2 is not going to be a problem, so I'm not super worried about it, and in the absolute worst case scenario, I can always put in a pump and pull a small amount out as needed. To maintain a seal on the room, I opt to exploit the tile exclusivity of liquids and gases, rather than waste power on an airlock or duplicate time on a mechanical door. In my experience, doors aren't actually that good at prohibiting gas flow, so if you're willing to accept the dupes having wet feet, it honestly seems better in every way to just have them take a dip in a swimming pool. This also lets me pull a vacuum on the room, which is a nearly essential step to controlling the atmosphere. After a small eternity of pumping, I learned several things. First is that it is way faster to have my dupes tile up the room, evacuate a small area, and then mine the room back out because pumps are slow. Gases flow really slowly, and it takes forever. Second, oxygen masks do release carbon dioxide to the environment, though that isn't really a concern here. And third, under no circumstances is Grey Thorn ever to go inside a vacuum-sealed area. One fart was enough to set me back a day's worth of pumping. And for that, she is forever forbidden for entering the Dreco farms, because I do not want to have to deal with a natural gas buildup. The amount of gas this one dupe can release is ridiculous. Now we just need to engage in the delicate act of pumping in enough hydrogen to maintain vapor pressure for the mealwood without pumping in too much incompatible gas on accident. The plants need at least 150 grams per tile of gas in order to grow, but conveniently for me, gas laws are kind of a loose suggestion here, so this means I can displace 150 grams of carbon dioxide with 150 grams of hydrogen somehow, which results in a design not requiring a whole lot of either to pressurize as needed. I have a clean source of carbon dioxide down to the left of my base, so once I get all the hydrogen in, I can add the dioxide as needed to balance the gas levels. And since duplicants can't breathe carbon dioxide and only exhale a small amount of it, the design should be almost perfectly stable. Until, something rots in there. Before I can get the farm going, there is one more unforeseen complication to deal with, and that is the sad news that Maxwell's demon has finally summoned me to thermodynamics hell. Or, in other words, my base is heating up. This isn't news exactly, because it has been doing this since I started playing the game, but the base heat spread rate, combined with all the warm hydrogen I pumped in, has rendered most of my mealwood infertile, and infertile mealwood means starving Drekos. My solution for now is insulative tile and wheezewort, though even as a temporary fix, I'm not convinced this is going to be enough. There is a lot of heat creeping in, and I have no idea how strong wheezeworts are in the grand scheme of things, but given that you can plant them in a plant pot and feed them phosphorite, my assumption is probably not very. After letting them sit for a couple days, I can say with certainty that wheezeworts aren't very strong, but in this particular instance, it doesn't really matter. All they need to do is beat the small amount of heat that seeps in from the surrounding tiles, and insulated tile is, by design, kind of really good at not letting heat seep in. It's a bit like throwing a toaster in a fridge, but in reverse, and the toaster's winning. With most of my mealwood grown, now all I need to do is, I think, relocate up to 8 Drekos into each of the rooms and just kind of let them exist there. I could not find a whole lot of information about how taming works other than the wiki articles, which are not terribly in-depth, so I assume it's automatic. The way I see it, I may as well try and see what happens, and the worst thing that can happen is that I will have a bunch of mildly angry sheep in my base, which on the goose scale of natural disasters is a rounding error above the least bad option. Alien sheep do not, in fact, riot, and they don't do anything at all, actually, because wildness is reduced with regular grooming, a fact that should have been immediately obvious since that is the express purpose of a grooming station, but nowhere in any of the documentation is this mentioned, for some reason. Whatever. I have squid sheep things, my dupes are trimming their butt hairs for space cotton, and through the power of crippling electrical infrastructure overdraw, I am also incubating their eggs for more baby sheep spider squid things, because more is more better. They aren't going to be making plastic for a while, though, because they have to mutate, so I need another solution in the interim. That solution is a set of machines called an oil refinery and a polymer press that are designed to do exactly what you would expect they would, in conjunction with a pump assembled all the way down at the bottom of the map, feeding off of the excessive excess of random lube that I found abandoned down there. It, like everything else in this negentropy forsaken map, produces heat, so I have that to look forward to, but I finally have plastic now, so it will be nice to not have my dupes drop what they're doing to start randomly bowling in the middle of the floor because they don't have nice beds, at least. So, weirdly enough, I don't think the juice was worth the squeeze here. Don't get me wrong, the beds are good, and having plastic production unlocks some important tech and quality of life stuff, but my colony is having some serious issues that were exacerbated a lot by my monomaniacal focus on memory foam mattresses. The first and most obvious is the rampant slime lung infestation that has been plaguing my storage areas for the past month or so. As far as I can tell, this was caused by me storing slime in the bins, which off-gases polluted oxygen in areas that are not protected by deodorizers. This polluted oxygen got infected with slime lung, and the slow buildup of polluted gas let the germs build up enough to start infecting my dupes every time they breathe the air. For the most part, I think I have that handled now, which is as simple as eliminating the polluted oxygen, and the germs should be dying back, but it will be a slow process. The second problem is, once again, that the flipping oxygen levels have skyrocketed, which is causing substantial ear trauma to my dupes and substantial cranial trauma to me, because they're getting stressed and I'm having to clean up after them. I could mine out some more space to let the gas flood out, but in doing so, I would be exposing myself to warmer biomes, which would exacerbate the overheating problem that I'm only barely winning against. So I think this problem requires a technical approach this time around. My new plan for the oxygen problem is inspired by my experiments with fluid compression from the first video. In that episode, I discovered that fluid vents were able to drip fluid into a gaseous medium, otherwise known as a gas tile, and that the drops of fluid would join with the body of fluid underneath the gas tile regardless of how much fluid was actually present. This did eventually crack the tank I was using to hold the fluid, but I'm pretty sure that can be avoided by using thicker tank walls, and, more importantly, I have seen zero evidence to suggest that gases have the same compression problems. What I have here is a very small space filled with a quantity of three gases: oxygen, natural gas, and chlorine. Chlorine and carbon dioxide are heavier than oxygen, so they will fall to the bottom of my mini tank and sit on the vent, but because there's less than 2 kilograms of them, they won't overpressurize. So then, what happens when I pump pure oxygen in through the vent? Well, it has to go up, right? But then it depressurizes the vent, and then I can pump more oxygen in. Interesting. Very interesting. So it's time to ask the obvious question then. Does it stack? The answer is yes, though it does tend to delete the non-oxygen gases for some reason. The design still works because the vent is occupied by a small amount of whatever non-oxygen gas is being pumped in, so I don't really care, but I will want to be careful to not oversaturate the thing with non-oxygen gas, since I suspect that that would clog the system. Either way, I now have an infinite storage solution to the gas problem. All it will take is cheese and some pumping. Some more experimentation with a similar setup flipped upside down with the oxygen at the top and a carbon dioxide sink at the bottom has entirely different results though. Here it looks like the oxygen gas is being slowly deleted as the carbon dioxide comes in, which is really odd because this didn't happen with the other one. So I'm clearly messing with the game in a way that was not intended, so it's possible that this is just a bug, but it looks like I will be unable to store infinite carbon dioxide with my current design. Put a pin on that for future potential exploitation / experimentation on later. In the meantime, I guess I can just use a regular tank or something lame like that. Oh well, more digging. 2 pumps are currently running full-time, extracting 500 grams per second each of oxygen and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but that is only a kilogram a second, and I have several thousand kilos to go, so I may as well expand while I have the excess gas pressure to play with. And after a good long time of digging, building, and research, my base has largely recovered from its multiple independent crises. I dropped the atmospheric pressure to a mere 2 kilograms of oxygen per tile, which was causing the bulk of the stress, and while it may not look like it, the slime lung problem is figuring itself out. Most of the infestation you see was aggravated by breaking into fresh pockets of polluted oxygen, and the deodorizer army should make short work of it without my involvement, which means it's time for more long-term engineering projects. The first one is moving and expanding all of my duplicate needs facilities to the new space that opened up on the left. The idea here is that duplicants only need to eat, sleep, shower, and pee once a day, and they do those all during the same time, so unlike in RimWorld where my maintenance usually requires multiple trips around the base a day, there isn't much reason to keep them central to the colony. This also gives me a chance to expand the facilities and rework them with some logic nonsense to permanently resolve the potential urine overflow issue the first design had. I'm really beginning to see why people keep calling this game a plumbing simulator, because it seems like that's all I spend my time on. Next up, storage. Just enormous scads of storage. One might even say humongologungulous amounts. Tim Tam Tofambulogungula. Point being, my current storage system is almost full, and the non-trafficked parts of my base look like a dumpster, so I'm going to need even more storage than I have to clean the place up a bit. This time around, I'm smart, and configure my settings to do things like not put meltable ice in general storage where it can then melt and pour water on the floor. The real tech here is the top row of bins, which I've left partially submerged in a bit of water intentionally. This batch of bins is going to be dedicated for anything and everything that is capable of outgassing, which includes oxalite and bleachstone, but most importantly, it also includes slime, rot piles, and polluted dirt. Having these in my general storage has been a substantial source of polluted oxygen, and every time the clouds of stinky were exposed to slime lung, my storage area turned into a biohazard. We will ignore for a moment that the water I'm pouring on them is infested with food poisoning and is also from the sewage outflow pipe. But because it's exposed to oxygen, the germs should die eventually, so it's fine. To combat the backbreaking amount of dumb labor I'm going to need to retrofit my colony into something pleasing to look at, I opt to bring in another dupe. Welcome in, Raven Murphy. Your task is to do absolutely nothing except haul things, 24/7. It sounds boring, and it is, but it's honest work if only in the sense that it honestly needs to be done. On the rim, we would call you a battle janitor, but out here in the void of space, there isn't much battle to be had, so get janitoring. While we're at it, let's also make a kitchen, medical area, and massage area. I have no intention of using the last two of these, but it's a nice way of looking through all the different machines and figuring out what they do. So, productivity? Question mark. And let's also add another dupe to round us out to 8. Welcome to the colony MaxGamer134. Once you get some relevant skill points, you are going to be helping out Luna Manson with the animals, so poor Luna can do what she actually wants to do, which is beating the ever-loving snot out of the mealwood plants with a weed whacker, or something. She's been quietly just mega backlogged for ages now, and I'm planning on adding more critters and more plants for various production reasons in a moment, so that problem would have only gotten worse without you around. So here we are. My base and my dupes are mostly stable, and I expect them to remain that way for the foreseeable future. What next? My eternal quest for exploring in depth all of the game's intensive and world optimizing mechanics is being stalled out by two main complications. The first is my lack of power production, and the related lack of good options for improving it, short of burning through a very limited supply of coal. The second is the lack of heat management. Heavy industry is hot, dirty work, and my base has no capacity to thermoregulate whatsoever. So if I just start cranking out steel, I will very quickly melt my machines and melt my dupes in that order. To build systems that can plunge out those bottlenecks requires space, and to get space requires mining. So once again, my problems are to be solved by the wanton destruction of natural ecosystems. Fun times. With all of this brand new free real estate to play with, I quickly get distracted, and instead of the production area I had originally intended to start building up, I opt to put in a little something called a tank bank. Don't mispronounce it. I did some playing around with fluid overpressurization in a test world, and it turns out the answer to how do I keep poo water from breaking my tank is just make a thicker tank, you dingbat. There doesn't seem to be any nuance to this either, so as long as every side of the tank is no less than 3 blocks thick, you can store literally an infinite amount of fluid with no issues. As you can imagine, this was a very interesting finding for someone who wants to excavate the entire world to fill it with things, but keeps running into annoying problems like water. I tried to future-proof my tank designs as much as possible, because maintaining these things when they're storing, say, 300,000 kilos of poo water is going to get complicated, but I don't really know what the endgame of my colony will look like yet, so the design may end up requiring updates regardless. For now, I have, in each tank, 2 fluid pumps made out of gold amalgam to resist damage from hot fluid, looking at you, oil field, wired up and ready to accept donations. In addition to this, I also have runs of radiant gas pipe going through the entire tank, and I made sure to insulate the sides of the tank just in case thermal control is an issue. It isn't super robust, and it wouldn't hold up to, say, liquid magma, which is a fluid I found during testing that I'm very interested in getting my hands on, but it should do for most of the tamer stuff this game has to offer. During this time, I also finally give up on algae terrariums and slam down a couple of oxygen diffusers. More efficiently using algae was nice, in theory, but I have 27 tons of this stuff. The amount of time my duplicates spend messing around with the polluted water cleanup is just not worth it, and I'm going to want to be switching over to electrolyzers once I beat the heat problem anyway, if for no other reason than I want hydrogen for my gas-based coolant loops. Anyway, finally, heat deletion time. The core of this system is 2 machines, a steam turbine and a thermal aqua tuner. For reasons probably related to game balance, but in complete violation of the laws of thermodynamics, steam turbines accept hot steam and output power and warm water without also emitting the heat that went into them. In the real world, this is still an entropic reaction because the heat has to come from something, so solar, fossil fuel, nuclear fission, geothermal, whatever, and that conversion is less than 100% efficient, so you end up with waste heat. Oxygen not included steam turbines have no such restrictions, and just straight up turn heat into power. Seems exploitable. The real trick is going to be concentrating the heat enough to boil water back into steam. There are a couple ways of doing this, but the most efficient one I've found is with something called a thermal aqua tuner. It takes hot liquid and chills it down, outputting the heat that it extracted from the fluid plus a little bit as waste into the environment. When that environment happens to be a room full of nothing but water, you get a whole lot of steam, which is then recycled back into the steam turbine for heat deletion. The design I built has an aqua tuner cycling a chilled coolant fluid, which is in this case oil, through a reservoir I will fill to capacity with more oil and radiant fluid and gas pipes. Oil freezes at around -40 degrees centigrade and boils at a temperature high enough to not matter, and it has the highest thermal conductivity of any fluid I was able to find lying around. So my hope is that any heat coming in from the fluid or gas pipes in the reservoir will very quickly sequester itself in the freezing cold oil bath, where it can then be ripped out by the aquatuner coolant loop and turned into steam. I could run the coolant oil directly through the aquatuner, but this cooler is going to be doing things like managing the HVAC for my oxygen supply, and I wanted the temperature controls to be more fine-grained than as cold as possible or no cooling at all. It's a pity I can't say the same for my workplace's actual HVAC system, but I'm reasonably certain it was assembled by high school dropouts, so I will just be glad that it doesn't burn the place to the ground. HVAC is complicated, y'all. It's real complicated. The one drawback of this design is that it absolutely munches power to a ridiculous degree. Aquatuners take 1.2 kilowatts to run at full tilts, which is almost half of my base's energy output, and it is going to be a real long time before the system saturates with enough heat to start producing a little bit of power to counteract that. For the moment, the best and only option I have available to do that is burn coal, so let's do some more of that, shall we? The new power production area gets to live in with the rest of the machines, and thanks to some automation, courtesy of a couple of auto sweepers, it should happily function with the only duplicate input being occasional coal deliveries and NG tune-ups. Coal production isn't critical yet, seeing as I'm sitting comfortably on 30 tons of the stuff, but it is trivially easy to set up, so I'll do it anyway. Hatches are a creature that eat basically everything, up to and including solid rock, and the planetary scale constipation caused by their questionable comestibles apparently causes them so much discomfort that what comes out the other end isn't just bricks, it's high-grade anthracite. Farming them is a simple matter of dumping a bunch of them in a room, slapping down a grooming station and a dump truck's worth of gravel, and letting them exist. And it looks like the honor of the first "oh wait, the game just broke" moment goes to Drake. You see that blob of ice? Yeah, I do too. The game seems to think it doesn't, however, and wishes to inform me that this blob of mysterious but clearly visible ice is undiscovered. You know, despite Drake being stuck on it, literally right next to it. That's fine. For this, there is debug mode. With better power logistics up and going, there are a whole bunch of new projects that I want to start working on. Oxygen generation is not one of them, but in light of the fact that my oxygen pressure is tanking only marginally faster than my algae supply, that one needs to happen immediately. The situation is so concerning, in fact, that I don't even bother carving out a dedicated spot for it. I just plonk the fastest, most ghetto design I can throw down in the middle of an area I have earmarked for my heavy industry lines and call it good. Technically, one electrolyzer should be enough to sustain my 8 dupes, but I have enough yucky lungs and slime lung going around that I opt to go with 2 just to provide a bit of a buffer. It isn't like oxygen goes bad, after all, and if all else fails, I have a redesigned gas tank setup that I was looking for an excuse to deploy anyway. The one drawback with electrolyzers is that they consume an ungodly amount of water. For now, that price is being paid by the polluted water ocean that has been chilling out under my black hole tanks, but when that runs out, I'm going to need to start doing something with the saltwater geyser over on the left. As a stopgap measure, I go ahead and dump all of the cached oxygen from my first black hole tank back into the atmosphere. The popped eardrums the pressure wave causes will not make people terribly happy, but suffocation probably wouldn't either, so they will need to suck it up. And I cannot believe I made that joke. I'm probably going to have to cut that later. Running in parallel with my need for more oxygen is my need for less other gases. So my final build of the episode is a bunch of my improved gas storage tank design. I did some messing around to try and solve the gas deletion problem and discovered that the easiest way to get around it is to not use gas at all and instead dribble a very small amount of inert liquid, like literal grams of the stuff, onto a tile in front of the vent instead. Oxygen production and distribution is the only gas that I expect to need thermal control over, so that is going to be handled by the HVAC system once I have a moment of breathing room, haha. So I don't even need to bother with coolant loops or anything. My tanks are just boxes with infinite gas storage capacity and some insulation thrown over the top just in case it becomes relevant. By the time those get finished, though, my coal supply has notably decreased, even with a full hatch farm pooping the stuff out, so energy production is definitely going to be a priority here. But that is something I will have to deal with next time. And that is where we shall leave it for today. This is your last reminder that if you like geese and you like mousepads, you can get a goose-themed mousepad at the link in the description. The drop ends February 16th, so get them if you want them, I guess. More importantly, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.